Hey everybody, my name is Jonathan Samarco, and I'm going to be presenting on human trafficking, and I'm going to be talking about human trafficking here in the United States, but also in Canada as well. So, on this first slide, I'm going to be discussing what human trafficking is. I'm going to be giving you guys a brief definition or to try to give you guys a better understanding of what human trafficking is. So, human trafficking, also known as trafficking in persons or modern day slavery, is a crime that involves compelling or coercing a person to provide labor or services or to engage in commercial sex acts. The coercion can be subtle or overt, physical or psychological. Exploitation of a minor for commercial sex is human trafficking, regardless of whether any form or force, fraud, or coercion was used. This is this is a direct statement from the United States Department of Justice. It is a common misconception that trafficking only occurs in underdeveloped or third world countries. That is false. Human trafficking is an extremely widespread criminal market that occurs worldwide and can be seen in almost all countries across the world. Labor and sex trafficking alike generate multi-billion dollar annual profits. Multi-billion dollar annual profits. That's how profitable this human trafficking industry is. Sexual exploitation is the most common form of human trafficking. In fact, forcing women into sex trafficking is the norm in some parts of the world and in some countries. So, on this slide, I'm going to be discussing who is disproportionately affected by human trafficking. So, as we all have learned through Dr. Weinberg's lecture videos, we all know that women and girls are predominantly victims of sex trafficking and sexual exploitation. So, generally, individuals who are seen as vulnerable are most susceptible to coercion and are most susceptible to being brought into this human trafficking industry. Um, According to Anti Slavery International and the U.S. Department of State's 2005 Trafficking in Persons report, there are approximately 27 million people worldwide presently enslaved. Of those 27 million people worldwide that are presently enslaved, 80% of them are women and 50% are children. That's a big amount. That just goes to show that 4/5 of the people that are involved in human trafficking are female. On this slide, I'm going to continue talking about how women are disproportionately affected by human trafficking compared to men. So, at-risk persons include those who are economically challenged, socially disadvantaged, migrants, immigrants, children, teenage runaways, and many, many more. Young women will even be recruited by young men or even maybe gang members who lure them in with a promise of some kind of affection. On this slide, I'm going to be discussing, just giving you guys a little bit of brief history of human trafficking. So, to start, human trafficking, again, like I said earlier, is the buying and selling of human beings into sexual exploitation or forced labor. It has been deemed the modern version of slavery. Human trafficking is not a new phenomenon, especially given how incredibly similar it is to the well-known notion of slavery. I just wanted to point that out because I think that is extremely important, that human trafficking has been going on a lot longer than some of us may think. And it was only at the start of the 21st century, however, that the United Nations criminalized it under the protocols of transnational organized crime in 2000. So it wasn't until kind of recently that the United Nations finally decided to view human trafficking as criminal behavior. On this slide, I'm going to be playing you guys a short portion of a TED-Med video by a woman named Susie Baldwin, and it's going to be discussing the intervention in healthcare trafficking throughout healthcare.
And deception is a key part of human trafficking. It's one of the things that makes it such a hidden crime, because traffickers use not just overt violence to control their victims, but many people are enslaved with tactics of psychological coercion, brainwashing, manipulation. The perpetrators will also target people who are vulnerable because of poverty, migration, homelessness, addiction, disability, mental illness, stigma, and when it comes to children and teenagers, involvement in our child welfare and juvenile justice systems. Consider Tanisha. She was 16 when I met her. She lived at home with her mother and little brother, but had spent time in foster care when her mom was in jail on drug-related charges. When Tanisha was 14, she met a 20-year-old guy at a fast food restaurant near her middle school. He told her she was beautiful, and no one had ever told her that before. She loved riding in his car with him and feeling free, like a grown-up. One Friday night, after taking Tanisha out to get her nails done, her boyfriend told her he was short on cash. He needed her to help him out. She wanted to help him out after all he had done for her. So they went back to his apartment, and the boyfriend put Tanisha in a room with two of his friends who raped her and then gave him $200. With that act, Tanisha's boyfriend became her pimp, and she became entangled with him in what's known as the life. She also became a victim of human trafficking. Federal law describes inducing a minor to perform a commercial sex act as human trafficking. It's also considered child abuse in many states. When Tanisha was 15, she showed up pregnant at labor and delivery. The nurses there viewed her as a tough kid. They observed her bad attitude, her tattoos, and they dismissed her as a gang member. They weren't aware that pimps often will brand their victims with tattoos in order to mark them as property. They weren't aware that Tanisha was a victim. And what made it more complicated was that Tanisha didn't know she was a victim either. We are missing rare but critical opportunities to empower patients like Tanisha and Rafe with the support and tools they need to escape their situation.
So on this slide, I'm going to be discussing intervention in human trafficking throughout healthcare, and I'm also going to be discussing some of the information that you just heard through the video by the TED-Med video. So this portion of the TED-Med talk is a very realistic example of how human trafficking works. First, coercing women into trafficking does not necessarily mean that they are kidnapped or taken hostage. I'm going to say that again. First, coercing women into trafficking does not necessarily mean they are kidnapped or taken hostage. I think that this is so important because I feel most people, when they hear human trafficking, they tend to think of the movie Taken, starring Liam Neeson, where his daughter and her friend are taken by some guys in France and are brought into the human trafficking system. While yes, that does happen often, not every time that somebody is involved in human trafficking was that person kidnapped or taken hostage. Sometimes they are placed in manipulative situations and are not even fully aware that they are being taken advantage of, as Tanisha, the example from the TED-Med, had no idea that she was even being taken advantage of until it was too late. The relation to healthcare is perhaps the most important part of this TED-Med talk, if you ask me. So I'm going to be continuing discussing the intervention in human trafficking through healthcare on this slide. So it is exceedingly difficult for victims of human trafficking to seek help or to be honest about the experiences that they have undergone, as these experiences are very traumatic, and it makes it difficult for these victims to even want to seek help. Like, they're just so broken. Um, it is a crucial duty of healthcare workers to be able to recognize signs of human sex trafficking in order to properly cater to the needs of the victims. So again, as in the example, when Tanisha was pregnant and went to go seek help, they just dismissed her as a gang member because of her tattoos and things like that. They missed these signs that show that she could potentially be involved in some kind of human or sex trafficking. And though the signs may be close to invisible sometimes, health health professionals must be able to provide trauma-informed assistance to patients and survivors if they want these people to eventually get better and maybe be able to live a normal life again. So here on this slide, I'm going to be discussing human trafficking in the country of Canada. So Canada has only recognized the severity of sex trafficking crimes as recently as 15 years ago, which again shows that hasn't been until a couple years ago, recently, that countries are now starting to realize that human trafficking is a big problem and it needs to be stopped. So the sentence in Canada for human trafficking is a prison term of up to 14 years, although most perpetrators spend less than 3 years in custody, which to me is mind blowing. There are no mandatory minimum sentences, and the penalties are more like a simple, slap on the wrist. Like these people are ruining other people's lives, and some of these sentences, these people are only going to jail for 3 years. I don't think that is right. Because of our lax criminal justice system, human traffickers are finding Canada as an easy target to grow their business and victimize young women at home and abroad. On this slide, I'm going to be discussing human trafficking here in our home country, the United States of America. So, a excuse me, a common misconception about human trafficking is that it does not happen in the United States. This clearly and obviously is false, as the United States is ranked as one of the worst countries globally for human trafficking. It is estimated that almost 199,000 incidents occur within the United States every year. That is a big number. That is a lot of people from the United States that are somehow ending up in this human trafficking industry. California, Texas, Florida, and New York are the 4 states with the highest human trafficking rates in our country. This could partially be due to their large populations, prevalence of immigrant populations, and agricultural or lower income communities. Even major events such as the Super Bowl or the World Series are closely monitored for illicit activities and trafficking, because these events are so big, it's almost like a distraction where it makes it easier for these people to find girls and like kidnap them or whatever, lure them into the human trafficking system. So this slide shows the United States human trafficking map. It is presented by the Polaris Project. Polaris is a nonprofit, non-governmental organization that works to combat and prevent sex and labor trafficking here in North America. So this map just shows where human trafficking seems to be more prevalent within our country. So as you can see, New York is where it is red. That is where more is happening. So New York, yep. California, yep. Miami, all these different places. It's showing where majority of the human trafficking of people, of U.S. citizens, is happening within our country, and it's sad. We really need to find ways to to stop this from happening, especially here in our country. So on this slide, I'm going to be discussing Canada and the United States of America's efforts to combat human trafficking. So the most difficult part of assessing human trafficking across these two nations is acquiring, excuse me. So the most difficult part of assessing human trafficking across these two nations is acquiring accurate and consistent data. Victims of human trafficking are not easily identifiable or quantifiable. As I explained earlier, it is important for healthcare providers to notice the signs and symbols that somebody may have been involved in human sex trafficking. There is immense opportunity and potential for both Canada and the United States to learn from each other's approaches to combating TIP and to strengthen both domestic and cross-border partnerships. Both countries have enacted national plans in recent years designed to try and combat and fight back against human trafficking. And lack of sufficient borders controls is problematic and allows for trafficking to occur. So on this slide, I'm going to be discussing the cultural factors. The extent of human trafficking is difficult to assess due to the hidden nature of these offenses. The reluctance of victims and witnesses to come forward to law enforcement, and the difficulty of identifying victims in practice. Most cases of human trafficking are unreported due to the fear and manipulation of the victims. Religion, spirituality, family structure, and general cultural norms all play a factor in how human trafficking is conducted and the extent to which it is normalized around the globe. So on this slide, this just shows convictions rise worldwide as awareness of human trafficking increases and the fight against it persists. So on this slide, we can see that as the years have gone on, so this graph shows from 2009 to 2016 that human trafficking has continued to progressively go up. The only year that it declined a little bit was from 2013 to 2014. It declined almost from 6,000 to 4,000, but as recently as 2016, 9,071 human trafficking convictions on the rise. That's again, there's too many people that are being involved in human trafficking, and there needs to be more things done to stop this from happening. On this slide, it shows a little bit of a demographic of the age of detected victims of human trafficking. Most commonly targeted group appears to be individuals between the ages of 15 and 26. So as we could see here on the graph, like I just said, between 15 and 26, those seem to be the highest age group in which people are involved in human trafficking. Also, it shows a steady decline as you get as the age goes up. But then for 39 to 47, it's pretty high again. But that is the main age frame that these human traffickers are trying to find women that fall under that age frame. I'm going to be continuing talking about demographics on this slide. So, though adult women make up the majority of trafficking victims, no portion of the population is excluded from possibly being victimized. It can easily happen to any gender, any age group, or any nationality. As I've explained, it's sad to say that women are disproportionately affected by this. In terms of health, women are affected the most because women are often used for sexual exploitation, whereas men are used for forced labor. On this slide, I'm going to be discussing some of the common mental health issues that can be associated with victims of human trafficking. So, one of the biggest impacts on women's health is the array of mental health issues that can be seen in survivors of sex trafficking. So, the majority of survivors have depression, anxiety, post traumatic stress disorder, also known as PTSD, or a more severe diagnosis, disorders of extreme stress, which is can also be known as desnos. In addition to these diagnoses, many victims of sex trafficking also have secondary psychological issues, such as alcohol and drug abuse, plus concurrent medical illness, which add to the psychological burden that sex traffic victims already endure. On this slide, I'm going to be discussing some of the physical health issues that these women are affected by through human trafficking. So, physical consequences are just as prevalent as mental health issues in sex trafficking victims. So, gynecological issues such as STDs are just one example of many of the physical health issues that come with the victims of human trafficking. Um, this quote states that the skin and hair may show evidence of cigarette burns, attempts at self harm, rashes, evidence of intravenous drug use, vitamin deficiency, bruising from physical abuse, and infectious diseases such as tuberculosis or lice. The teeth need to be examined for dental caries and poor overall dental hygiene. Methamphetamine and bulimia scar teeth as well. On this slide, I'm going to be discussing some of the genetic factors and substance abuse. So, a lot of sex trafficking victims are genetically predisposed to having mental health issues and problems with addictive substances. This quote states that many sex trafficked victims, like many victims of violence, are from families with high prevalence of depression, schizophrenia, alcoholism, and or substance/drug abuse. Aside from drug use, there is also a link between victims and criminality and poverty, both of which cause further damage to the well-being and mental health of the survivors of human trafficking. So, I just want to give you guys an overall summary and conclusion of my presentation. So, as I have stated earlier in my presentation, human trafficking is undeniably a very serious criminal offense and massive illegal industry that is extremely profitable, and it needs to be stopped. Unfortunately, it is exceedingly difficult to gather information or conduct research on something so secretive. Um, the secretive part of this is what makes this industry so hard to like pinpoint these people that are in charge of the human trafficking industry. The practice of trafficking itself and the testimonials of survivors and victims are both relatively unexplored. More in-depth research is for sure necessary in order to put an end to human trafficking in all forms. Um, Given their proximity and shared borders, the U.S. and Canada must put forth a collaborative effort towards stopping human trafficking, especially between our two nations. I personally do not think that there has been enough done between these two countries to really fight against human trafficking and try to put a stop to it, or at least make a dent in like the numbers and bring the numbers down from 199,000 cases in the U.S. Like that number needs to come down, and it needs to come down as soon as possible. And that's pretty much it for my presentation. I want to thank all of you guys for taking the time out of your day to listen to it. I hope you all enjoyed it and learned something. And this is my these are just my references and my citations. There are four that can be seen here on this slide, and I have four more references and citations that I used in order to gather all this information to provide you guys with a presentation on human trafficking here in the United States and in Canada. Thank you guys.